Well, Kip, welcome back to the show, man. It's great to visit with you.
Yeah, good to see you too. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So I know you've been on before. It's been a few years. Back then, though, it was just we taped everything over the phone. The gift of COVID is we get to do everything over Zoom, so we actually get to see each other now.
That's right.
Yeah.
So it's always a benefit. Nice to be able to look at somebody, even if you can't be in the same room as you're having a conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, tell me about, and I know it's been over a year, but the name change from QDMA to National Deer Association.
Yeah, back in 2014, QDMA, the organization I have been with for more than 20 years now, we had the first National Whitetail Symposium. What came out of that, or one of the things that came out of that, was the stakeholders said, you need to have a stronger advocacy arm. And we said, okay, we'll do that. So we created that. That was always supposed to be a part of QDMA. Through some bickering with board members and some other outside interests, that ended up being removed from QDMA, and it was its own organization. It was called the National Deer Alliance. We worked very closely with the Alliance for years, and then during COVID, we really had a second chance to do what we had intended the first time, which was have that be an arm of the organization. So we merged. So that is how the two got together. Now, we still have the same logo that QDMA always had. The name is different. Again, kind of a second chance to do the right thing. We'd had some surveys over the years that we knew, we had some really good data showing the name QDMA had some negative connotations with it relative to people who didn't own land or weren't interested in managing habitat or deer. So the word quality turned some people off. The word management, people thought, well, if I don't own a bunch of land, that's not for me. So even though about a third of QDMA members didn't own a single acre of land, it was negatively impacting recruitment. So when we merged with the Deer Alliance, we said, you know what? Now is the perfect time. If we're going to make a splash, let's make a big splash and really get this right. So we selected the name National Deer Association, a name that resonates very well in deer camp, with buddies like you and me, and a name that resonates well in the halls of Congress when Torrin Miller, our Senior Director of Policy, is in Washington, D.C., fighting on behalf of hunters' rights. So that's why we merged, which essentially it should have never been a part anyway, and the reason for the name change. So we look at it as, some folks are just never quite courageous enough to take a big swing on something they think is right.
Yeah.
Organizationally, we said we think it is. So that's what we did, and that's what brought us to the name National Deer Association and the added benefit of that strong policy arm today.
Well, generally speaking, I'm vehemently opposed to any kind of diversity, equity, inclusion, but this is one that makes sense. If you're alienating the landowner, the non-land landowning deer hunter, then with that name, which I get, I don't own any land either, but I'm in the industry. It wasn't alienating to me, but I certainly can see how it would have been perceived. Like, I'm only hunting for meat. What is, I don't care if it's a 4-point or an 8-point or a 12-point. If it's in front of me, I'm going to shoot it and put it in the freezer. Yes, the quality deer management, might not be for me. So yes, National Deer Association, very inclusive. So you guys are based out of Pennsylvania.
We are completely remote now as an organization. We used to be based out, or we were based out of Georgia for over 20 years.
You're in Pennsylvania.
I am in Pennsylvania, yes. And so we have staff in several different states, but through COVID, we are now a 100% remote organization. So our CEO lives in Pennsylvania. We have many staff in PA. We have many staff still in Georgia, and in several other states as well. So for me, it really didn't matter. I've always been here and just travel the country to wherever I need to be to work. So I've always worked remotely. So it's business as usual for me. It definitely was a little different from our folks who worked out of our national office, but we have, that's been seamless transition into totally remote, and organizationally, we're even stronger, or we're even more responsible now, I should say, with all of the money that's raised for conservation, allows us to do even more. When we're hiring new people, we can draw from a wider network. Folks don't have to move to a certain state. So it's been good for us. It's been real good.
So your backdrop is a bunch of rolling hills. Is that Pennsylvania?
That's actually Victoria, Australia.
Oh wow.
I was
Okay.
invited to Australia a couple months ago by the Australian Deer Association to go and meet with landowners, government officials, hunters, and to talk about some of the deer stuff we do here. Actually, Dr. Craig Harper from the University of Tennessee, Dr. Bronson Strickland from Mississippi State University, and the three of us went there together and spent 2 weeks touring Victoria and Tasmania, met with all kinds of folks, gave all kinds of presentations, and did a little bit of hunting along the way as well. And so this is actually South or Southern Victoria that we're looking at here.
Okay, so I mean, I think the only deer species I know in Australia is it sandbar? They have those there?
That actually is what we were hunting the day that I took this picture. They have
Okay.
6 deer species, none of which are native.
Probably
but they have-
fallow. Everybody has fallow.
Yeah. So that fallow, which is the predominant one in Tasmania, sambar, which is what we're hunting here in Victoria. They have red deer. They have axis, like I see on your chair behind you. They call
Yeah.
them a cheetle, but an axis is the same thing. They have they have some Sitka deer. Oh, what else they have?
Sika deer, probably.
Oh, I'm sorry, hog deer. So we spend most of our time looking at hog deer, sambar, and fallow deer habitat. But they have 6 species altogether. So that was pretty interesting.
Are you knocking your computer by any chance, or your desk?
I had my hand, I think, on the base of the microphone.
Okay, yeah, there, no worries. Well, that's fascinating. I've always wanted to go to Australia. It's on the list. Probably in like the top 5. There's a few other things I want to do first, but I did want to ask you because it's been in the news a lot. They're trying to and I don't know if it was in Victoria, somewhere they're trying to ban bow hunting in Australia, and have made some progress. I don't know if that was something that you guys were speaking to or aware of.
It wasn't. I haven't seen that. They're having major issues there with the government trying to eradicate deer in several places. It's amazing. They don't have the value of deer there like we do here. Even if the average US person doesn't hunt, as Americans, we recognize the value of deer. In Australia, they don't. They see them as non-native, so we should get rid of them. But can you imagine the US if, pheasants aren't native, if we try to get rid of all the pheasants,
Right. Yeah.
and red fox aren't native, we try to get rid of all. So anyway, it's a very different culture, and they have hunters there fighting to keep deer, and literally government programs of aerial shooting, like we do with hogs in many places to reduce populations, that doing the deer, and they're shooting, just letting them lay. Very, very sad. We don't realize how lucky we do have it here in the States.
Yeah. Well, and so that and you wouldn't think that even in the States. So I don't know if you've been to Hawaii and hunted axis deer there, but they treat those deer the same way as what you just described, as a pest. Yes, there are outfitters that make a living selling axis deer hunts, but they pay people. And the guy, my guide, did this in his former life, and then he was like, "Wait a second, I could be making money and actually helping the deer population." They just paid him by the night to go out and shoot every deer and every hog that he saw with the spotlight and just leave them there. Just get paid by. They call them eradicators. You get either put on salary or paid by the night. Go shoot them all, leave them lay. They don't care. Doesn't matter if it's 33-inch axis buck or a doe. It gets the same treatment. I was just like, geez, man.
That's very similar to Australia then.
But they looked at it as you wouldn't think they'd be in a drought on Maui, but they were. And they're like, the real problem is for the farmers, not just the deer eating the crop, but being a drain on the water table. They said there's so many deer, they're consuming so much water, and we don't have native cervids here, and so that they're like, well, we've got to do something about these deer. So yeah, they don't respect them, they don't treat them like we do, for sure. And that's in the U.S., but Hawaii is an interesting place. I'm gonna look up Australia bow hunting ban, just because I want to make sure I wasn't throwing that out of nowhere.
I know that they are very
all Australian states except Tasmania allow bow hunting. Huh. Interesting.
And I know a lot of that they shoot during the day, they shoot them at night, they shoot them with thermals. They shoot them with spotlight. But it has to do with that,
Yeah.
eradication part. So, hunt them all day. And as soon as it gets dark, turn the spotlight or your thermal scope on and keep on going.
Yeah. Well, I just got back from a bear hunt in British Columbia on Vancouver Island, and I learned a new term there. And my guide was telling me about his buddy was hunting and had a misfire, and the gun went off in the. Thank God it was pointed in the floorboard, but the gun went off and shot a hole through the bottom of the truck. And he goes, yeah, and my buddy was up to no good anyway because he was pit lamping. And I was like, pit lamping? What is that? He goes, I don't know. It's where you get a spotlight and shine deer and shoot them. He's like, what do you call it? And I said, well, in Texas, we just call it spotlighting deer. So pit lamping, interesting term there.
Yeah, I hadn't heard that either. I heard like jack lighting is
Yeah.
often a term, but I hadn't heard of pit lamping either. So,
So
I learned something new today as well.
Yeah. It's exciting right now to be, a whitetail hunter invested in just, even if you don't own land. Like I have 2 deer leases and I'm watching, my antler growth and what bucks are starting to shape out as, and that's exciting times. I mean, this is really, it's like the doldrums of summer. We can still hunt hogs here, but it's so hot. There's not a lot going on. Most people are fishing or, playing golf or doing something else. But that's like the one thing, you get your updates on your cell phone and get to watch these deer put on antler. And so that's always cool to see them and track their growth. What like food sources are deer really targeting this time of year? Does it change as they're putting on growth? I mean, I know the browse is all seasonal, but what kind of diet are they really keying in on?
If possible, they're really keying in on an herbaceous diet right now, which is all of those broadleaf plants that we associate with old fields or early successional vegetation. So certainly ag crops, if they have the ability, that too. But so not woody stuff, so it's before that. So it's, anything like chicory, clover, it's all of the native forbs. In general, deer don't eat grasses that much. They much prefer broadleaf plants, of which the forbs fall into that broadleaf variety. In general, we think, livestock, they love grasses. Deer, not at all. When deer are eating a lot of grasses, it's usually because they're being limited nutritionally. So right now, they're eating all that herbaceous material, those broadleaf plants they can. Those things are very high in calcium, phosphorus, and other minerals, way higher than grasses are. And that's what bucks need for antler growth, what they need for body growth, what does need for, milk production for fawns. So, so many hunters think of the fall as, okay, this is when I need to have nice food plots and a bunch of food to attract deer. The reality of it is spring and summer, that's when your habitat needs to be rocking if you want to be a good deer manager, because that's the most critical time of the year for them and the most energetically expensive time of the year, growing antlers, feeding fawns. So that's right now, there should be tons of high quality food available. And the largest segment of that is going to come from those broadleaf plants.
Well, and I can just say from personally observing, we have winter wheat fields pretty much on every place that I've ever leased. Whether it's the landowner or sometimes they lease it out to a rancher, and if they're running cows, they want to have a wheat field that they can bale up and feed the cows throughout the winter. And I don't really see the deer in the winter wheat field in the spring and summer. Now come, winter, they're piled up in there. Maybe that's just, that's what's available. And I know you said they don't really eat a lot of grass. I know they'll eat the winter wheat, but it seems to be a seasonal thing for them.
Very seasonal. And those cereal grains, that's the exception to the grass part. So they're not eating the cool season perennial grasses or the cool season annual grasses or even those warm season. So the cereal grains, oats, wheat, rye, they love those. Of course, corn is a grass, they're eating that. But yes, from the winter wheat is great from where you are in Texas all the way to where I am in Pennsylvania and beyond. I always plant winter wheat or winter rye. It's, in the fall, it is a great attractant. Deer love the forage and over winters. And in the spring, it's one of the first things that greens up. So deer are on it immediately. Turkeys are out in it, and deer will eat that until it starts to put the seed head out. So as soon as that seed head's out, then they're not interested in that vegetation anymore. Once the seed head is mature, if it's an awnless variety or a beardless variety, it doesn't have those hairs on the seed, then deer will literally eat every single seed head. If there's awns on them or those hairs, they won't eat them. Doves and a bunch of other birds will, but deer won't. So yes, they do like winter wheat, but it is very seasonal as well. Yeah, they're not going to be eating that now there or even here where I am.
Unlike my hogs that can't stay out of it. It's like crack for hogs year round, nonstop. They're in there. It's like, and sometimes middle of the day they're in the winter wheat field. It's crazy.
Yep.
So, and why we're talking about food sources is I've seen some of these viral videos lately come up where deer are eating the damnedest things, and I'm talking about like animal protein. Like they're eating a baby bird, they're eating an egg, a chick. They're eating, the most recent one was a snake. This deer's chowing down on a freaking snake. And I've never thought of deer as omnivores. So can you explain to us what this phenomenon is? Why are these deer eating animal protein?
And you're right, they're really not omnivores. They're herbivores. Their teeth are very much designed to eat plant material. But we have lots of examples of them eating other things. You mentioned that recent snake. I think everybody in the country has seen that. Birds, eggs, lots of examples of them eating fish, examples of them chewing on other, fawns, spent cartridge shells, lots of different things. So part of it is, I think, nutrition related. There might be a mineral that they're missing. Deer are very good at being able to key in on something that their diet's lacking. So that can play into it a little bit. I think a lot of it, though, is just curiosity from some of these. I have watched deer around birds' nest, stare like as just kind of trying to figure out what this little thing is hopping around, and then end up eating it. And I don't know that they were actually hungry. I don't know that they were seeking a certain mineral. I think it was a curiosity thing, and it just grabbed it. The snake was an interesting one. Of all the things I've seen them eat, fish, yeah, that kind of seemed like a dead fish along, a raceway at a fish hatchery or something. I can totally see curiosity there. And, ooh, let's try it. Deer get actually most of the water that they need through their diet, through the plants that they're eating. So something that is very wet, fish, snake, there might have been some, something appealing about that. I think more than anything else, though, it was, something that was unique. I do wonder, though, with the deer, there clearly was a fence right behind the deer. That deer was definitely tame. I wonder if that snake, I really doubt that deer killed that snake. I think the snake was probably dead. Who's to say, it's possible that was a staged picture where, a captive deer, somebody might have put some type of attractant on that dead snake, and then filmed the deer eating it. And then, oh, look at this, he's eating the snake. Because that was a really big snake for, a deer to be picking up and eating. That's not normal behavior at all. So deer are cool. They do some strange things. Fortunately, we have cameras and trail cameras out now to be able to catch a few of those, but definitely not something you're going to see on a daily basis or something that would happen very often at all.
Huh. Okay. Yeah, I was just curious. And I think it's probably always happened, but not everybody had a cell phone, 30 years ago. So now
I have seen some really cool things, when I was in graduate school at a deer research facility, back in the 90s, way before cell phones, that I would give anything to have had a cell phone when I was out, with a captive deer to video this. So you're right. There's just more opportunities than ever before to capture that stuff. We see more bucks that are locked up than ever before. And part of that is, yes, we have an older age structure of bucks than we've ever had across whitetails range. But yeah, we have a lot more cameras in the woods, on our sides, in our pockets all the time. But regardless of this, that was still really cool that deer was chonking on that steak. That's a pretty neat video that guy got.
Fascinating for sure. Well, that was the main thing that I wanted to ask you. I will say this: explain to us how a cervid's rumen works and what its function is.
Yeah, so deer are cervids, so they have 4 chambers to the stomach. So one big stomach with 4 chambers. The first is the rumen, and the rumen is by far the largest of the 4. So
Some of my
deer,
listeners are probably pretty familiar with this, having been proficient gut shooters of deer.
if you hit them in the stomach, you likely hit them in the rumen.
I know the first buck I ever shot, I gut shot and was like, I hope I never do that again. And I'm sure that I have, but I think more times it's happened when I've been cleaning a deer and punctured. You know, you got a sharp havilon and like, oops, there's that smell. Well, no, that sucks. But yeah,
that's the rumen.
Yeah.
So they eat food, it goes to the rumen.
Mm-hmm.
And then what they do is they don't chew their food entirely. You know, they get it as big of a piece as they possibly can swallow it, fill that rumen, and then go hide and then ruminate. Ruminate means they regurgitate that food from the rumen back to their mouth, and that's when they chew it into small pieces. So this is a defense strategy. When you're exposed feeding, eat as quickly as you can, and then go hide in the safety of cover and digest it. So they eat, it goes to the rumen, it comes back to their mouth, they chew it, smaller pieces, it goes down, back into the rumen, passes through the rumen into the next chamber is the reticulum. From there, it moves into the third chamber, which is the omasum. And each of these, if you open them up inside, they all look very different. The rumen is full of all these little microvilli, so all these little finger-like projections. And what that does is it increases surface area. It allows, so say a deer's rumen is this big, because it has all those villi on it. If it didn't have those, it would have to be this big to have about the same amount of material. So it allows that to be smaller so that the deer can be faster, quicker, more agile, which is really cool. The inside of the reticulum looks like a honeycomb. The inside of the omasum looks like a bunch of folds, like in a book, and it's often called the book. Then the last one is the abomasum. That's what's most similar to our stomachs. And then by the time it gets there, it's essentially all the fluid is pulled out of this, all the nutrients are out, they're being digested. So then from the abomasum, it goes into their intestines. But the other 3, the reticulum, omasum, and abomasum, very small relative to the rumen. The rumen is the really big one. So if you're going to do stomach content analysis, where you actually can pull stuff out of the stomach, wash it off, and a lot of times still see, this is how they do food analysis of deer. You can see berries, leaves, corn, acorns, etc., you know, and get an idea of things that deer ate. That is always being done from the rumen, because once it gets past the rumen, then it's, you know, you can't tell any of that anymore. So one thing that's cool with that with fawns, think about fawns drinking milk. You know, milk doesn't need to be regurgitated. So the way fawns get around it is they have what's called a ruminal reticular groove. When a fawn is drinking, that groove actually closes to bypass the rumen, so that milk goes straight to the reticulum, which is super cool. And it takes the suckling action of the fawn to do that. So if you grab a fawn and you pour milk down, it's going to go either into its lungs or into the rumen. That groove won't open. But when that fawn is actually suckling on that doe's udder, that makes that groove close, so it can completely bypass the rumen and right to the reticulum. So super cool way that deer are built.
Well, now I've learned something interesting today for sure. It's fascinating. Do you guys do a lot of predator hunting in Pennsylvania? It's coyote management, stuff like that.
We do. There's a lot of coyotes, a lot of bobcats, a lot of coons. Although when I was a kid growing up in Pennsylvania, you know, all of my buddies had coon dogs. We hunted all the time. Almost nobody does that anymore. There is quite a bit of a coyote and bobcat hunting now. Most of that is calling, you know, but there is a fair amount of running those with dogs as well. Problem is you have to have big areas, you know, to keep those hounds, you know, off places they're not supposed to be, which can be very problematic. But there is some of that, but there is a fair amount of predator hunting that goes on. Most realize, look, we're not saving additional fawns. We're not making a difference in how many survive, just because it's so timbered and it's so mountainous in a bunch of Pennsylvania that you just simply can't kill enough coyotes to make a difference. So that hunting is done purely from a recreational standpoint. Lots of coyotes, lots of opportunity. Go and have fun with it, and you know, shoot some coyotes along the way.
What if you are implementing, like in Texas, for example, aerial gunning? We do a lot of feral hogs, but you know, a pile of coyotes typically gets shot in those scenarios. And then also snaring, trapping.
So
Do you
there's no
believe
aerial
that?
gunning in Pennsylvania.
Okay, but do
That
you
you
believe
can't do that.
those things could make a difference, especially if you did it religiously springtime or into early summer when these fawns are hitting the ground?
There are a few places in Pennsylvania that are open enough with high enough densities of coyotes that yes, you could that way. So much of Pennsylvania, we are really, really forested and so much of it that it's just simply not a viable technique.
Mm,
You know, you just simply can't see enough to of coyotes to be able to shoot them that way.
mhm.
Snaring, we do have snaring, I don't know if a lot of trappers use that, but certainly a fair number of trappers will snare. Um, you know, even coyotes aren't worth anything, you know, their hides anymore, you know, compared to what they
Yeah.
used to be. So it's a pretty small number of people that trap anymore, whether it's raccoons, you know, possums,
Well,
skunks.
my
There's
buddy,
so
for
many more nest
example.
predators than ever because
Oh
folks
yeah,
just aren't doing it. You know, and
yeah.
that kind of goes for coyote snaring as well.
Well, and our agricultural practices have changed as well, which I think also lends to you have one factor, people aren't doing it because the pelts aren't worth as much. And then number two, we have more agriculture, which means now we have more food for these predators,
Mm.
scavengers and um, varmints, more food for them and less pressure on them. Well, of course, their population's pretty much going unchecked. But I guess for this, let me just lay this situation out. So you have 1,500 acres in South Texas, and you may be high fenced, you may not be, but you have fence around your property where you can snare. Can you make a difference in that situation where you're running a trap line and you're checking it a couple times a week, and really, and maybe you're doing it in a window where you think certainly deer are most vulnerable, and maybe coyotes. I don't know if once they have pups on the ground if they travel more or less, but I don't know. Just do you think that can actually help with your
You
deer
can
herd?
make a difference if you snare or trap at a very intensive rate.
Hmm.
And what happens is people who are successful at it do that just before the fawning season to try to reduce some of those coyote numbers before fawns hit the ground. The reality of it is, though, the next year, those numbers are often right about coyote numbers about where they were before you started. There's some research that shows you have to remove about 75% of a coyote population to reduce it, you know, because they
Huh.
just compensate with additional breeding.
Yeah.
So the answer is yes, but it's an incredibly intensive effort that you have to maintain year after year after year. Most people that get into that, they think that's great for, you know, 1 to 3 years, and they realize, holy cow, you know, I just can't. Um, and the results are mixed from a research end on, does it do anything from a fawn standpoint? Some will say, some show, yeah, we actually saw an increased fawn survival. Others, you know, not that much. So my take on it is I'm I'm huge on habitat enhancement. And what we know is that if we provide really good fawning cover and fawning cover spread throughout a property so that the majority of does can take advantage of it, that more than anything else is the best way to increase fawn survival. If you want to trap as well, certainly nothing wrong with that,
Hmm.
but you're not going to fix your fawn survival problem by trapping alone. So you can do that in addition to good habitat work, but you're going to save more fawns by doing good habitat work and having that really good cover.
And I guess if your buddy's not doing the same thing, then kind of what's the point, right?
That's the same thing. You know, they move in all the time from next door, you know, and some of these coyotes move so far. It's crazy. You know, the number of miles that some of this research has shown they'll go. So, yeah, you're never going to get rid of them. And, you know, there seems to be about a number that, you know, they can limit or self-regulate themselves, the numbers that'll be in an area. So, you know, you take some out, more just move in. So
Mm-hmm.
you're better to fix it with habitat. Go ahead and hunt them and have fun hunting them. You know, it's a great recreational opportunity. Just don't expect to save a lot of fawns by hunting or trapping alone. So, or I should say trap as well, because I love to trap. So,
Mm-hmm.
you know, that's a great use of time and outdoor activity. But you're not going to help yourself from a deer end by doing that alone.
I want to ask one more question as we're wrapping up here, because you mentioned coyotes moving extreme distances, and you've always heard during the rut, of course, bucks will travel. And we know that because I'm hunting this buck, and then here comes, I've got him on camera. Here's archery season. I don't run into him, and then he's gone. And he shows back up in January. So we know they travel. But how far, typically, when you say a buck travels, I mean, how far are they going? I was hunting a 10-point. He was at my feeder every night, but I was only getting nighttime photos of him. And our lease is 4,000 acres, and a guy on the completely different side of the property ended up shooting him at like 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And I'm like, dang it. I was happy for him. I was like, hey, great job, Rodney. Let's send me a picture. He said, I just shot the biggest buck of my life. And I was like, cool, send me a picture. He sent me the picture. I'm like, dang it. I was like, I'm still happy for him. We got back to camp. I'm all high fives. I'm a team player, which I think everybody should be. We should be happy for everybody's harvest. And so my son's 10. He's like, man, Dad, that sucks. I'm like, don't say that word, son. And no, when we get back to camp, we're only going to say congratulations, and we're going to be happy for him, because you know what? That guy would be happy for you. And we all collectively as a community need to be supportive of each other's accomplishments. But what was surprising was how far that deer was. I was like, so what it made me realize that buck, because he ended up having him on camera at daylight hours almost every day. So he was coming, and it was taking him, half of the night to get to my setup. But he wasn't living by me. He was living by Rodney's place. And but I was like shocked that deer on such a big property was really living over there, but still coming to eat my protein in the middle of every night.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of deer movement studies out there from north to south, and some great stuff out of Texas. Basically, it shows that every deer is an individual, and while bucks, on average, have a home range of about a square mile, which is 640 acres. It's all over the place from that. Some are homebodies and they just don't travel that far. Some travel a lot. Some of the Texas stuff, this deer had home ranges of well over 2,000 square miles where they were traveling. So, so it's all over the board, where those are. That's why with game cameras, you can kind of key in on, hey, I'm getting this deer regularly, or like your case, I'm getting him regularly, but only at night, as opposed to, man, I get like one picture a year of this deer. If that's the case, probably not a deer you want to hold out for. If it's a deer you're getting regularly, then maybe he does spend more time there. I think that's one of the things that makes whitetail so cool, is that, there are a lot of personality differences, movement preferences. So we know definitely some average, home range and movements and all that, but everybody's a little different. We do know, though, that as they age, they tend to not move as far. So, when they get into that 5 and 6-year-old age class, they definitely are moving less or in covering less ground in general. Now, not to say that, like during the rut, they're not taking off, but in general, they just don't move as much. They become a little more sedentary. So that is a pretty good rule of thumb. But up to that point, man, it's all over the board how much they want to travel. It's kind of up to the individual deer.
So that experience, it left me with the realization. I'm sitting there thinking I've just got this nocturnal buck, and I'm hoping that, the rut's going to make him slip up. But the reality was he wasn't nocturnal at all. He was just taking his midnight stroll every night to get over to my setup by, 3 o'clock in the morning or whatever it was. And then he was going back there. So I don't know if I ever would have caught up to that buck in daylight.
Yeah, maybe not. You're right, though, in thinking that, hey, he's just not moving nocturnally right now. We'll keep at it. And that entirely could have been it. He could have been right in that area where you were hunting and literally just not moving until, later. So you never really know unless you have multiple cameras and you can pick him up on multiple cameras, multiple times. And so to see, ooh, you know what? He's always headed this way and it takes him this long to get here. Then you can sometimes get a little better idea of where they may be coming from. But in your case, it could have absolutely been just as likely that he was bedded somewhere nearby and, just wasn't getting up and moving until later.
Yeah. Well, and it's totally different, though, at least 200 acres in Oklahoma. And on that place, I can figure out probably where a deer is coming from, how long it's taking him to get there. It's a small property. The 4,000 acres, I could have put out 50 more cameras and never figured out, what game trail that buck was using on a place that big. So, well, fascinating stuff, Kip. I certainly appreciate you jumping on today And I don't know. Do you put in one thing? Always fascinates me about Pennsylvania. You guys obviously have a great whitetail deer hunting heritage. I think Pennsylvania, when it comes to deer shot, is like right up there with Texas. Is I think we shoot the most deer between the two states. Do we not?
We do. You guys always shoot more deer than any other state. Pennsylvania is always right at the top for the number of deer shot per square mile. So,
Yeah.
So yeah, we both of our states definitely are leaders in the deer hunting world with numbers of deer hunters per square mile, etc. So, I mean, deer hunting is pretty cool in a lot of places, and in no places is it greater than Texas and Pennsylvania.
Yeah. Well, so that's always been something that I've known about you Pennsylvanians, but also you guys have an elk herd. So do you put in for the elk draw?
I do. We have tremendous elk hunting opportunities if you get a tag.
Right.
We kill some of the biggest bulls of anywhere in the United States in Pennsylvania each year. It's a really well managed resource, limited number of people that get in, but if you draw a bull tag, you stand a chance of killing an absolute whopper. So I have 2 young kids, and so each year we put in for the elk lottery. And it's, if nothing else, it's a $10 donation to, a good cause.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of fun as you're waiting, for the lottery to come out, anticipation, wait, like, oh man, maybe they'll draw us, maybe they'll draw us. Chances are they're not, but hey, you got to play to win. So it's a lot of fun to have with the kids as we wait for that elk lottery.
All I got this year for my elk draws was unsuccessful. But but it's also fun to play the game out west and build points in X state. And then I'm not the guy that's trying to get 25 points in Arizona, but you can hunt every 4th or 5th year in Wyoming and Montana, and maybe you mix in get drawn in New Mexico and go OTC in Colorado. I mean, there's ways to make sure that you can elk hunt every season. So
yeah, I've gone OTC in Colorado twice, and do-it-yourself hunts, and I've had a phenomenal time out there, and just love the Rocky Mountain experience and all that. So yeah, there's definitely ways, and I like whitetails more than
Pennsylvania's Rocky Mountain elk and hardwoods, though, huh?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yep. So a little bit different, but big animals for sure.
Yeah. Well, I certainly appreciate the time. Y'all check it out, National Deer Association. Kip, we appreciate you, and thanks for all you do.
All right. Thank you, Cable. Good seeing you.